Hello there and welcome to Keep and Destroy. This is your host, Adam Luff. This is the Gerry Anderson podcast where I interview the fans and ask a really hard question. And that is, what 5 would they like to keep and what 5 would they like to destroy? And for this episode, I'd like to welcome Dave Munday to the show. Welcome, Dave.
Hi, Adam. Thanks for having me on. It's really cool to be on. I've really enjoyed the series so far, and getting a perspective from lots of different fans on all different far-stretching corners of the Anderson universe. So I feel quite privileged to be sat in the hot seat today, ready to talk some of the shows up and absolutely slap some of the others down.
You're more than welcome. Yes, I'll look forward to it as well. So let's start off from the beginning. When did you become a fan of Gerry Anderson?
Yeah, so the decision to be a Gerry Anderson fan was actually not really my decision, but I don't say that begrudgingly. It was all because of my dad, really. Stingray was my first love. Space 1999 was something I grew into and appreciated more and more. Yeah, so as I said, I don't remember a time when I haven't been an Anderson fan, and I've basically done the exact same thing to my 2 daughters, who I've basically been showing Stingray to. So I'm kind of hoping that in about 20 years' time, they'll be sat on one of these podcasts saying the exact same thing about me as I say about my dad.
I see that you have a debut novel, Writing in the Sand. Would you like to elaborate on that at all? And also, was it Gerry Anderson that inspired you to write it?
Well, I would say the long answer to that is yes, because Writing in the Sand is a little bit like The Expanse. It's set in this near future where mankind is kind of spread across the stars. It's just at the beginning where mankind is finding new places. The idea behind Writing in the Sand is you've got this kind of large conglomerate organization called the Atlas Nations, which is the leading world powers, have colonized a new planet in the Proxima system. And Britain hasn't really been involved in that. And it's a story about the battles that ensue when they try to kind of break extraterrestrial or interstellar treaty to colonize a planet that they're not allowed to. It's quite funny because actually when I wrote the whole thing, there wasn't really any direct Gerry Anderson influence until I started putting together some of the imagery for the second book, and I discovered that my villain that's in it is this alien that has really large orange eyes that can hypnotize people, and I was like, oh my goodness, it's the Hood, and I'd never realized.
So here we are with the beginning of the keep list. So what's the first thing that you would like to keep, Dave?
So my first choice is Space 1999, Dragon's Domain.
Great choice. Love that episode as well.
Yeah, so this was an easy one for me. It's a classic, Space 1999. This was such a formative episode in my life. I saw this episode when I was about 6 years old, and it scared the absolute living daylights out of me. But as I've got older, I've appreciated it more, if that makes sense. There's a lot of Anderson stuff that I've enjoyed as a child, and then I've watched back and gone, wow, that really doesn't work, which of course we'll talk about a little bit about later. But so they managed to build up this character that we've never met before. The flashbacks work really well. A lot of episodes of Space 1999 where they just give you a tragic character who's only there for one episode, and you don't necessarily care that much. But the tragedy of Cellini is, it really hits you because he was right, nobody believed him. And then when they get there, he doesn't really get to ever enjoy being proved right because he dies. For them to hit you with that bittersweet ending is something they do really well in Space 1999.
Well, the funny thing is that I actually read that the actual character was going to be Alan. It was going to be his story.
Yeah.
So he might have died, he might not have died. That's something obviously Space 1999 didn't do, which was kill off main characters. But whether or not Alan Carter would have been killed off, because it would have been the end of the season anyway. I think it's good that even though it is just a one-off character, the fact that he had that noble act of killing the monster in the end. But if Alan Carter had done it, it would have been a great character development for him of, this brave Eagle pilot, but the fact that he's got this demon, which he's been avoiding all this season, but either he would have been killed off and we would never have seen him again, or he would have survived and it kind of would have just felt a bit...
Might have ruined the payoff, mightn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
So my second choice is Thunderbird's Sun Probe. It really typifies the type of story that Thunderbirds, I think, should have been every episode in terms of the key story elements they go with on this one. The stakes are high, but it's not just for those that need rescuing, in terms of people who just aren't in the Tracy family. The Tracy family need rescuing too. One of the reasons why Thunderbirds isn't actually my favorite Anderson show, despite it kind of being for a lot of people and it's the most popular one, is because there is a significant number of episodes where they spend a little bit too much time introducing you to a bunch of sort of standalone characters that you're never going to meet again. So that, I like that they do that because it means you want them to be saved. But in terms of long-term investment, it doesn't quite tick that box as well as it should. But in Sun Probe, there's absolutely none of that problem. Because, in saving the astronauts who are obviously hurtling towards the sun, the characters we actually care about, in this case, Scott, Alan, and Tintin, they nearly die in the process too. So the tension just constantly ramps up throughout the whole episode. The stakes just keep getting higher and higher. And it kind of and then when you throw the Barry Gray score over the top, when it's all sort of so urgent and it's so cool. It's so cool. It's just everything Thunderbird should have been. This episode is like the textbook on Thunderbirds.
How do you feel about what I consider a very retroactive attempt at a two-parter? Because the Sun Probe sequence is in the Perils of Penelope, people say that it's a two-parter. I don't really think so. It was just as a means of padding the Perils of Penelope out. It was a nice attempt at some continuity, but the fact that Sun Probe comes before the Perils of Penelope, whereas really, for the sake of continuity, it makes sense if Sun Probe comes immediately after.
Hold it a minute.
That film, folks, taken a week ago, showed the launching of the Sun Probe.
It's kind of annoying that this is episode 4 and yet the prequel was episode 12.
I think actually in the broadcast order, I think Perils of Penelope comes first, because did they not broadcast that third?
And Sun Probe is 11.
Yeah.
So it still messes about, yeah.
Which it doesn't not work.
No, it ties in nicely to the fuel, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. So that's fine. When my kids are a bit older and I sit them down in front of Thunderbirds, I'll make sure they watch Perils of Penelope first, and I will explicitly tell them, two-parter, definitely a two-parter, because I like a good narrative. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
For the love of God, make sure you put Danger at Ocean Deep before Perils of Penelope, because that's another thing I always hate. That Scott's line of dialogue in that, saying he's been on every mission, but he wasn't in the Perils of Penelope. So make sure that those two episodes are put in the correct order as well.
I will do. So my third choice is Stingray, A Christmas to Remember. This ticks so many boxes if we're talking about quintessential Super Marionation, because this was the perfect balance of the cozy, almost twee kind of elements of a contemporary children's show with the sinister, more suspenseful drama that we know he actually preferred, because you can see UFO and Space 1999. Those, and Captain Scarlet, of course. You see some of the lead into that in this episode, but it doesn't really damage the episode, that it's still kind of quite jolly at the same time. It works. It really does. I mean, and like the way it transitions between these kind of warm, like family-friendly scenes, and then all the unnerving ones, it's done really well. The way they kind of seamlessly chop through. Like, we get this scene that could have been maybe romantic between Troy and Atlanta, like they're finally alone. But then they kind of throw out, but this villain's probably wandering around Marineville. We get one of Barry Gray's like excellent atmospheric pieces that kind of makes you go, well, yeah, this is kind of creepy. And then of course there's someone at the door, but it's just phones as Santa Claus. It's great.
Shucks, Troy. Now, what'd you go and do that for?
Out of the 4 Christmas episodes, although apparently there's 5, but New Captain Scarlet's Enigma is not a Christmas episode, so whatever. I've just noticed people have been saying that recently, but not at all. Anyway, so out of the 4, which are of course Christmas to Remember, Give or Take a Million from Thunderbirds, Joe 90's The Unorthodox Shepherd, and another one I really hate, Terrorhawk's Christmas Miracle. What do you make of the other Christmas episodes?
Yeah, they're so bad. Like they don't know how to create any tension. I think that's the thing, is this is the only one that works because they still try and tell a good story. One
thing I always found quite weird, and I'm going to have to do some photoshopping for the sake of this edit, but there's no on-screen title.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it's really strange.
Same with Set Sail for Adventure as well, because it was usually commonplace for the pilot to not bother having a title. But in the case of Stingray, there were 2 other episodes with no on-screen title, and I don't quite know why that happened.
Yeah, so. It's strange. It's rather ironic that the episode is called A Christmas to Remember, but clearly someone forgot to remember to do that.
Put a title, yeah, exactly. So I do find one bit of dialogue weird, and it's quite trivial, really. But
as he leaves Stingray, I will shoot him down like a dog.
I thought that was a bit of a strange choice of dialogue for an alien, especially an undersea alien. They don't have dogs under the sea. It should have been something like,
I will shoot him down like a crab.
It's hilarious. I rewatched it the other day with the kids, and I thought the exact same thing. What frame of reference has he got for a dog? So yeah, my fourth episode that I've chosen is UFO Survival. The payoff is good, but it's horrible at the same time. You know, it ties those things together really nicely. And like a lot of these episodes that I've picked, you know, there's a lot of suspense and mystery going on. You know, you assume at the start that the title maybe is going to refer to like how mankind can survive their war with the aliens, but as the episode progresses, it's obvious that it's a word that just applies to any living being. And then when you start to see the two characters kind of interact with each other, it starts to signify this kind of wordless simplicity of the common bond that living beings share, which is the fight for survival. And of course, it's easier to achieve that together than as enemies. And the fact that they're face to face, it's quite easy to pull the trigger on just a spinning object, but they show us that it's a lot harder to pull that trigger when you're eye to eye with the enemy. There's this bit where the alien Paul steals the gun and he's about to shoot him, and he can't do it. And that's even before the alien reveals that he's actually removed the cartridge to suggest, well, do you know what, I couldn't either. You know, and you can tell the aliens kind of cottoned onto this kind of like shared goal. And then, you know, and then the payoff is so good as well, even though it's tragic. It's brilliant because the inability to communicate, they use it to kind of tell that simplicity, but then of course the inability to communicate at the end, the problem is the communication between a human and another human, because he can't communicate to the people who've come to rescue him that the alien is the good guy because his radio is broken. And then the admittedly understandable prejudices of the shadow officers who rescue him, you know, that bursts it bursts the bubble of like our growing affection for this alien in the same swift and brutal way that at the start of the episode they have in the pressure leak. You know, the way the bubble kind of gets, the balloon gets bigger and bigger and bigger in the pressure leak and then pops, is like a really good foreshadowing of how you end up feeling when they kill the alien at the end. It's this like really harsh, brutal, swift, and like, oh, absolutely masterful. It's a quality episode. So my fifth and final episode to keep is Captain Scarlet Avalanche. What made Captain Scarlet so, ahead of its time was, of course, the way that Gerry introduced the audience to a war of nerves, you know, decades before the Western world became so kind of acquainted with, you know, concepts of terrorism. And this is an episode that highlights it really well because of who in this episode doesn't get that. Within this episode, as much as the threat that Spectrum are trying to stop is the Mysterons, with General Ward's kind of closed-mindedness, it basically sets them in a race against time, not necessarily even just to stop the Mysterons. They need to basically stop the Mysterons before the human who's got the nuclear launch code starts like the next World War, you know, and that's so mature for a show that's like technically a kid's show. It's come straight after Thunderbirds.
Obviously, because Thunderbirds had hit such a high note, Captain Scarlet had some big boots to fill. So I think they just tried everything possible to be as different from Thunderbirds, from having realistic puppets, having a darker series, and then having so many adult themes, shall we say, in Captain Scarlet. So yeah, I could never see this ever working in something like, if it could have worked in Stingray, but I think it would have been much more comedic. Even though General Ward is kind of comedic in his arrogance, with something like Stingray, David Graham probably would have perhaps made him a little bit too over the top, in all due respect to David Graham, but he always had that comedic. Well, just look at his performance as Avril Denver. It would have been that type of character, really. But yeah. But no, Paul Maxwell as General Ward just gives him that gruff sort of, it's his way or the highway, basically. So no, I totally agree. They had to do something drastically different in order to compete to the heights that Thunderbirds had reached. And although at the time, Captain Scarlet didn't reach those heights, but since, especially with the 90s reruns, I think Captain Scarlet is pretty much become on par with Thunderbirds as a result.
Oh, I think so. So another reason why I really like this episode is because we have something different in Lieutenant Green actually gets to go on a mission. And of course, his role was iconic anyway, because he was the first like black character to have a prominent role on a Super Mario Nation show that Gerry made. I did always feel it was a little bit underused, at least initially anyway. But this episode is where they really give him the chance to take part in the action. You know, the dialogue and the in the field banter and chemistry with Captain Scarlet's really good, and he gets to punch someone. You know, he just gets to do stuff. You know, he gets to be Captain Blue. Because do you really think Captain Blue would have punched that guy? Perhaps not. You know, he's a bit more of a stickler for the rules.
Because it was a karate chop as well. That just
of course
says,
it is. Yeah, sorry.
That just says some backstory completely. The fact that clearly Lieutenant Green is great at judo or karate, whichever martial arts you want to call it. No, I like that. But with Captain Blue, I do think, even though we never saw him be violent, but there was some dialogue in Flight 104.
Right. That big blonde guy knocked the camera clean out of my hand. Said it was an accident. Some accident.
Of course. I stand corrected then.
Even though Gerry was finally able to have black characters in his shows, because he wanted to do it all the way back in Supercar, but wasn't allowed because of American networks back then. Was it possible that Lieutenant Green was limited and he was stuck on cloud-based most of the time. Was it because they still had to keep an eye out on the American audience? That is just speculation, though, because even though Star Trek was around at that time as well, but if I remember rightly, I'm not a big. I like Star Trek, but I'm no expert on the subject. But I think if I'm right, networks pulled an episode where Uhura kissed Captain Kirk. So I think maybe
that's right.
I'm just guessing, really, but maybe Lieutenant Green was not given so many episodes because of that. But who knows?
Yeah, it's entirely possible. It's speculation, but it's certainly speculation based on, an existing kind of thing that was there. Yeah, Star Trek, if I'm right, is the first ever show to have an interracial kiss, which was the one you mentioned there. So, yeah, there's a really cool piece of puppetry, which I love in this. You see Scarlet, he's got the opportunity to start the avalanche, and you see him tilt his head and his shoulder and the gun so he can eyeball this gunshot. And it looks amazing. And it all happens in one motion so that it looks real. I just think that's beautiful puppetry. It really is. I mean, we all know the puppetry is great, but that's just one real high point of just all Super Mario Nation. One of my favorite little moments.
And so we've come to the end of part 1 and the keep list. Part 2 and the destroy list will be next week. Thank you once again for watching this video. Please give it a like and a share and a subscribe. If you would like to donate to the show, please go to Buy Me a Coffee or GoFundMe. The links are in the description. This is Adam Luff, signing out.